Have you ever wondered why weeds appear in your yard? Have you ever wondered how they got there and why they chose your yard? In this video, I'll start with nature's plan to use weeds, then transition to weed basics, and finish with practical tips to prevent weed seeds from germinating in your landscape. Nature uses weeds as part of a process known as plant succession, which is used to improve the soil. The process starts with rocks and minerals breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. Every organism in this process plays a specific role to improve the soil until there are shrubs and trees, which eventually turn into a forest. This is a very slow process which can take several hundred years to complete. If something were to go wrong, like lightning strikes and there's a fire, then the process moves backwards. Like with any emergency, the only way for a successful outcome is careful planning and immediate action. Nature is prepared for any scenario because all these specialists, or weed seeds, are actually already in the soil. There are thousands in 1 square foot of land, and they are ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Some of the roles that weeds play include bringing up nutrients from the subsoil to the topsoil, breaking up compacted soil with their strong, deep roots, growing quickly to provide beneficial ground cover, attracting beneficial insects, and storing minerals and nutrients that would otherwise wash away. Next, I'm going to answer 6 common weed questions. First question, how many weed seeds are in a half acre of land? I already gave you a hint when I said there are thousands of weed seeds in a square foot of land. Conservatively, assuming there are 1,000 seeds in a square foot, then there would be over 13 million weed seeds in a half acre after excluding the home and driveway. I'm sure your reaction is this is impossible, so I'll quickly move to the next question to explain. How many seeds can one plant produce? Here's a picture of crabgrass, which can produce 150,000 seeds that remain viable for up to 3 years and can produce 150 to 700 tillers, which are each capable of growing new plants. This means if you have 10 crabgrass weeds that go to seed, then you could add up to 1.5 million weed seeds in 1 year. You can imagine how this number increases exponentially year after year if crabgrass is permitted to grow without intervention. Next, let's look at spurge, which produces several thousand weed seeds, which is far less than crabgrass, but its weed seeds remain viable for 50 years. I can go on and on with weed examples. The main takeaway here are that weeds are prolific seed producers, and seeds can remain viable for well over 100 years depending on the weed species. Next question is, what conditions trigger weed seeds to germinate? Germination is triggered by changes in temperature, moisture, light stimulation, oxygen, and nitrate levels in the soil. So why don't all the seeds germinate at once? There are 4 reasons, and the first is that weed seeds are specialists to fix conditions in the soil. Since all weed seeds don't fix the same condition, then they will never all germinate at once. The second reason is that many seeds contain a protective coat that keeps them dormant. Oftentimes, these coats are broken over the winter, allowing the seed to germinate the following year. A third reason is that once a weed germinates, it releases chemicals to prevent other weed seeds from germinating so they don't crowd each other out. The fourth and last reason is that approximately 240 weeds produce compounds that inhibit growth of other weed seeds like pussy toes, which inhibit the growth of other plants. So, how do all these weed seeds get on your property anyway? The reality is, most of them were there long before you, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. Let's look at this image from Montana State University Extension that will explain the life of a weed seed in further detail. Let's start in the top right, where weed seeds are dispersed by rain, wind, animals, and machinery. Understanding how seeds get on your property is an important piece to the weed management puzzle. Take wind, for example. In the right conditions, certain weed seeds like dandelions have a parachute that allows them to ride the wind over 100 miles. Other weed seeds contain a sticky substance that helps them stick to animals and are shoes or lawnmowers, helping seeds to move great distances. Once the seed is on your property, there are one of 4 possibilities. First, the seed may go into a state of dormancy. Scientists have learned that seeds use tiny brains to help them decide whether it's the right time to break dormancy, and it's believed that seeds have ways to communicate by sending electrical pulses. The second possibility is the seeds are eaten by a seed predator. Remember that seeds are powerhouses of energy and high in calories, so there are many creatures waiting to eat them. For example, ground beetles, crickets, earthworms, slugs, field mice, birds, and other organisms are all ready to consume weed seeds. The third possibility is that nothing happens. The seed simply never germinates and dies. The fourth and last possibility is for the seed to germinate. Once germinated, the new plant may die prior to growing to maturity or will grow to maturity and reproduce, therefore repeating the process. Congratulations! This concludes Weeds 101. I'll summarize with 2 points. First is that you have loads of weed seeds in your yard just waiting for the right conditions to germinate, and there are more seeds on the way. Let's shift to proactive strategies to manage seeds. When dealing with weeds on your property, we really have 3 options at a high level. First, you can let nature fix the soil by allowing the weeds to grow, which will improve the soil as well as all wildlife, or you can identify and fix the soil imbalances that we humans probably created, which will in turn prevent future weeds from germinating, or you can fight nature by treating the symptoms repeatedly. I'll pause for a moment while everyone selecting options 1 and 3 close out the video. For everyone else still watching, there are only 2 topics remaining. I'll start by covering the top 4 problems with the existing weed model and then move to practical solutions to work with nature. The first product in the current model that doesn't fit is that fun fabric that is pictured here with a thick layer of grass growing in the fabric. Weed fabrics, which are spread between the mulch and the soil, are problematic for several reasons. First is, how does weed fabric prevent weed seeds that are deposited on top of the fabric? This leads to my second concern, which is this picture of roots growing through the weed fabric that is a complete fail, indicating weed fabrics may not be a long-term solution. Lastly, and perhaps the most problematic, are the living organisms in the soil. How do the earthworms and other living organisms in the soil navigate between the weed fabric? From my experience, worms work best when there is not a physical barrier preventing them from working. Next up are stones, which have a similar problem as outlined with weed fabrics. Additional weed seeds are coming, and they will find their way into the stones and germinate. Also, how do you amend your soil after putting down tons of stone? Do you remove the stones, apply compost, then reinstall the stones every couple years? Stones are not a long-term solution to prevent weeds and build healthy soils to support your plants. Next are chemicals, which are worthy of a separate video to highlight all the harm they do to the environment, as well as everything in the environment, including humans. Additionally, the use of synthetic fertilizers causes a quick increase in nutrients, which, as we've already covered, causes weeds to germinate, requiring the use of more chemicals. If you're not familiar with how harmful chemicals are to the environment, then I recommend reading one of Andre Lou's books, which are displayed here. I also want to share the best free resource, which is beyondpesticides.org. Next is mulch madness. Now, I understand mulch is an important part of landscaping and is needed in specific scenarios. For now, I want to highlight 2 concerns. First is the use of black dyed mulches, which I've yet to find mentioned in any of the books written to build soil health, and I own many of them. The second point is that relying solely on mulch to prevent weeds is not sustainable because wood mulch does not decompose in 1 year. Therefore, annual applications of heavy, thick mulch leads to moisture being locked up in your mulch and suffocating tree roots. Okay, our last topic is practical strategies to prevent weeds. I'll start at a high level and drill down from there. First, we need to fix the soil and eliminate the unbalanced conditions that causes seeds to germinate. Nature's trying to fix the soil using weeds and is not aware of the tools we humans possess, or nature doesn't trust that we are going to use the tools at our disposal to address soil issues. Next, our actions to prevent seeds from germinating while nature works amendments into the soil. Lastly, once a seed germinates, it's important to eliminate the weed prior to the root spreading or the plant reaching maturity and spreading seeds. Now, let's drill deeper. I split the implementable solutions into 4 sections: knowing your soil, knowing your enemy, smart landscape design, and purposeful maintenance. The best way to know your soil is to test it. This is a great place to start, but I want to highlight the test will not tell you everything you need to know about your soil to prevent weeds. Now, soil tests are a large topic, and not all tests are the same, so I will reserve covering soil tests for a separate video. To point you in the right direction, I included the link to the USDA College Partners Directory to help you find a university extension near you. University extensions are the best resource for soil testing at a low price. Check out the extension nearest you for more information. This moves us to know thy enemy. Andre Voisin said, "Weeds always provide their own biography, just as animals and humans provide their own biochemical photograph." We are going to use this information to help nature along. I'll start with the 3 tools I use to identify weeds, then I'll move to the best references to provide you information on the weeds. At the top of my list is the weed identification app iNaturalist. I prefer using iNaturalist because it is so much more than an app. iNaturalist is a social network of naturalists, citizen scientists, and biologists who are mapping diversity around the globe. Here's an example where I added the picture at the top and clicked, "What did you see?" And the app provided the several options that closely matched. Since this information is used for research, oftentimes someone else will look at your match and may recommend a different match like the one displayed here. Next is the iPhone. Starting in iOS 15, Apple added functionality that identifies objects in photos, like the identity of plants. I like this functionality because it's so easy to use. After you take a photograph of a plant, click the information at the bottom of the screen. While in the information, I like to add a title like crabgrass, which I can use to search for later. To identify the plant, click the leaf icon in the middle of the picture and the results will display at the bottom. Lastly are Facebook groups. There are many groups available that allow you to post pictures of plants, and users in the group will help with identification. This is a great way to connect with like-minded naturalists in your area and a great way to learn about nature at no cost. Now that we've identified the weed, we need to better understand the conditions that caused this weed to germinate. The best resource I have found and use are these books. I'm only going to recommend the 3 books that provide the best content on specific weeds and the conditions where they thrive. To note, the primary audience for all these books is farmers. This doesn't change my recommendation for a homeowner to purchase the book, but I felt it was important to disclose. This book was prepared by the United States Department of Agriculture and is 100% focused on specific weeds and the conditions which they thrive. It's over 400 pages, including sketches of each weed, and therefore is a great resource to learn more about the weeds you are facing. I'm using an dated version of this book, but it looks like the current book was published in 2014. The next 2 books I purchased on Acres USA website, which is a great resource for ecological-based agriculture since it was founded in 1971. The first book is Weeds, Control Without Poisons, which was written by Acres USA founder Charles Walters. This is hands down my favorite book because it has so much information on weeds. Unlike common weeds of the United States, the first half of this book is a fantastic background to the organic approach to weed management, soil tests, and more, while the last half is dedicated to specific weed conditions. A great read for anyone looking to dive deeper into weed management without chemicals. And at the top of my list is When Weeds Talk, which was published in 2013. This book also contains a great background regarding the methodology of weed management. Where this book really excels, and the reason it's number 1 on my list, is the over 50 pages which are displayed in a table format, which is easy so you can find the weed and conditions it prefers easily. This concludes the Know Thy Weed portion and moves us into landscape design. It just so happens that I have 10 actionable recommendations So this is my top 10, but in random order. First is to cover all ground. Nature despises barren land, and weeds need sunlight to germinate. Therefore, mulch less and plant more. Your options are clear. You can leave open ground and fight nature, or select beautiful native shrubs and perennials that will cover the ground and crowd out weeds. This concept is often referred to as using cover crops in farming and using ground cover or living mulches in residential gardens. Number 2 goes hand in hand with covering the ground. Diversified areas result in high microbial biomass that promotes the decay of weed seeds. Therefore, if you are limiting open spaces with the use of natives, then use multiple different varieties. This will make your home beautiful by having plants blooming throughout the seasons and with less weeds. Number 3 is to feed the soil. Compost is one of the quickest ways to bring soil to life. Charles Walters suggests the best remedy is compost with its billions of unpaid microbial workers. Maintaining a high level of soil biology activity will shorten the half-life of weed seed banks. Number 4 is to plan for containment. Edging is not a requirement, but if your goal is a low-maintenance landscape, then consider edging. The main goal is to separate a lawn from the landscape by preventing the spread of plants horizontally via rhizomes. Lawns that invade consist of Kentucky bluegrass and all natural lawns, which have a variety of rhizome spreaders. To note, all edging is not the same depth and thickness. Take bamboo shield, for example, which is 24 inches tall and 60 millimeters thick. Number 5 is to plan for excess water. There are many options to handle excess water like rain barrels, underground drainage pipes, and rain gardens, to name a few. There are pros and cons for each option, and the best solution will vary from home to home. In the context of this video, the important part to realize is climate change will cause intensifying storms, so now is the plan to ensure you minimize soil disturbances, which will cause weed seeds to grow. Number 6 is to plan for the leaves. Each fall, natural sites advocate to keep your leaves so insects can overwinter. I agree with this 110%, but I want to highlight the other benefits in the context of weeds. First is that insects who overwinter in leaves may very well be seed predators or will attract seed predators like birds. Second is that leaves cover the ground and will block the sun from being able to germinate weed seeds. The last benefit is most basic. For healthy soil, you want to return anything taken from the soil back to the soil. Number 7 is planning for new beds. There are 3 basic techniques to deal with the existing seeds in your seed bank. You can kill the seeds, force the seeds to germinate, then kill them, or cover them. Let's take a quick look at each of these options. So, killing the seeds is completed through a process called solarization, which takes several months of covering the ground in black material, which heats and kills the weed seeds. Next is forcing the seeds to germinate by using a clear or white ground cover. As the weeds germinate, they will suffocate in the plastic. Lastly is to use cardboard to cover the ground with a mulch on top. This is very different from a weed fabric because the cardboard will be quickly recycled by earthworms. More importantly, the cardboard remains long enough to smother weeds. I've completed this process in the fall and then planted in the spring with great success. Number 8 is to plan for neighbors. By neighbors, I'm referring to the land directly around you. This may be state or federally owned property, like along roads, in fields, between sidewalks or wooded areas, and so on. We know seeds have many methods to traverse great distances, but many seeds go a short distance. Keep an eye out for neighboring properties and plan to mitigate weed concerns without trespassing. Number 9 is to fill in cracks. I once used chemicals for sidewalk cracks and asphalt cracks, which is a crazy practice. There is no amount of chemicals that will stop nature from growing a plant in a crack. The more chemicals you use, the more you imbalance the soil along with our drinking water, and the more weeds will return. A better approach is to address cracks using a sealer or repair kit to permanently solve the issue without chemicals. Number 10 is to design for the insects. We've already learned that many insects are weed predators or attract weed predators to your yard. Therefore, you want to attract them to your yard. Next up is to cover 5 maintenance activities to ensure we don't sabotage our weed-free design. I want to highlight that many of the soil issues were created over years, if not decades of soil neglect. Fortunately, soil can turn around quickly in one season and start moving in the right direction, but it takes several years to fully rebound. Keep in mind that most annual weeds remain viable for 2 to 3 years, so it's important to commit to staying on top of weeds during this transition period. The first maintenance item is to minimize soil disruption. The primary time we cause soil disruption is when pulling weeds, so I'm going to cover this process quickly. First, let's talk timing. The ideal time to pull weeds is while they are small to minimize soil disruption. Next, make sure you have a weed bucket large enough to capture the weed along with the soil attached to the root. Do not intentionally shake the roots to keep the good soil. Know that the price for keeping the good soil is to disperse weed seeds everywhere, which is not worth the cost in my opinion. One other tool to cover quickly is a soil knife, which loosens the soil so you can get to the roots easily. I currently use the Nisaku NGP 650 Ori Ori weeding and digging knife, which I purchased on Amazon. Please be aware, this is a very, very sharp knife, and it stays sharp for a long time. If you do buy a soil knife, I strongly recommend you also purchase a knife holder to transport the knife and to wear gloves so you're not injured. Okay, so there are 3 steps to pulling a weed. First, carefully pull back the compost and mulch so you can access the roots, including any tubers and rhizomes. Most weeds can regrow from small pieces of rhizomes, which have stored energy, so be sure to get all pieces. If needed, use the soil knife to loosen the soil and remove the weed. Be sure to pull the weed or put the weed directly into the bucket without spreading soil on top of the mulch. Lastly, return the compost and mulch. The second maintenance task is to ensure you are not spreading weed seeds. I'm not suggesting when you return to your house, you take your shoes off prior to walking on the lawn, but I am recommending that if you walk in a public park or somewhere that there are known invasive weeds, to take a minute to make sure there are no free rides. Third is to be observant. As you improve the soil, your garden will change. Nature will communicate with you, but only if you are listening. For example, if a new bird is singing each morning that you have never heard before outside your window, then you know you are doing something right. If you start seeing new weeds that you have not seen before, then nature is telling you that your soil is changing. Pay attention and continue to identify weeds to understand imbalances and adjust as needed. Fourth is to be smart if you need to water. Remember, weed seeds need water to germinate. Therefore, if you are watering a new spring plant in the summer, direct the water to the base of the plant and not the entire garden to limit the chance a new weed will germinate. Lastly, I have not spent much time talking about lawns, but I do want to quickly highlight that grass's natural defense against weeds is its ability to form thick mats that prevent the sun from reaching the soil. To note, I'm in the Northeast, so I only mow at 4 inches for tall fescue grass. I do not reduce the mower throughout the seasons. At this point, I have shared everything I know about weeds with you. I hope this helps you spend more time outside enjoying nature and less time fighting nature. As always, please click subscribe so you are notified as we create new videos.